Hello everybody, this is Kate at the Library of Whispers. Now I've been asked by a number of people whether I would do something about the death of Queen Elizabeth II, which occurred yesterday. So I decided I would, because it's a very monumental moment in the history of Britain, and as you know, I do quite a lot of videos on kings and queens and the history of the country, and obviously this is certainly a moment in history. I decided I was just going to use my normal voice rather than a whisper for this. So here in front of me I have the Times from this morning, the Times newspaper, and on the front is a photograph of Elizabeth II, Our Life in Service, April the 21st, 1926 to September the 8th, 2022. So I thought we would just take a look through the newspaper. Firstly, I'm going to read this article, Death of the Queen. Her Majesty the Queen, the longest reigning monarch this country has known, has died peacefully at Balmoral. As messages of sympathy arrived from around the world, the new king who will reign as Charles III led the tributes to his beloved mother as he spoke of the greatest sadness for his family. Charles spoke of his grief and the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. His words came soon after Buckingham Palace confirmed that Elizabeth II, 96, who served as head of state for more than 70 years, died peacefully yesterday afternoon. Charles said in a written statement, "The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held." Addressing the nation from Downing Street, Liz Truss announced Charles's new title. The Prime Minister said, "Today the crown passes, as it has done for more than 1,000 years, to our new monarch, to our new head of state, His Majesty King Charles III. The palace announcement, which came at 6:30 p.m, said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow." It followed hours of rising concern about the Queen after the palace said at 12:30 p.m. that doctors were concerned for Her Majesty's health. As members of her family, including all 4 of her children and Prince William, now known as the Duke of Cornwall and Cambridge, started gathering at Balmoral, it became clear that the Queen's life was drawing to a close. Charles will formally be proclaimed as the new sovereign at St James's Palace tomorrow. He is expected to give a televised address to the nation this evening at 6 p.m. The Queen, who was seated to the throne on February the 6th, 1952, upon the death of her father George VI, will be given a state funeral at Westminster Abbey, the first state funeral since that of Sir Winston Churchill in 1965. It will follow a lying in state at Westminster Hall, during which members of the public will have the opportunity to pay their respects. Books of condolence will be opened at St James's Palace, the Queen's Gallery, next to Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Holyrood House in Edinburgh, Balmoral and Sandringham. The Queen's death marks the passing of the only sovereign most people in Britain have known. She served her country through war, peace, social upheaval and technological revolution, a symbol of continuity and steadfast devotion to duty while the world changed around her. History will deliver its verdict in the fullness of time, but it is hard to conceive of her being remembered as anything other than one of the greatest monarchs in our history, a figure to rank alongside her namesake, Elizabeth I and Queen Victoria. Okay, so I'm going to just show you the rest of the newspaper, and then inside there is actually a special pull-out section which we'll have a look at as well. This is actually the last photograph of Her Majesty Elizabeth II, taken on Tuesday. Days for nations paid respect, and so this covers what will happen with the funeral and the preparations. So in the centre, here we have this pull-out section, which I'm going to take a look at. Here we have some photographs of the early years of the Queen's life. Let's have a read. When the Queen became this country's longest-serving monarch, the humility with which she acknowledged the passing of that historic moment reflected the same selfless dedication with which she once promised to serve her people. Some 68 years separated the pledge she made in Cape Town on her 21st birthday and the modest speech that she made on passing Queen Victoria's record in September 2015. But even if the empire to which she devoted herself no longer exists, the values she spoke of then were the values to which she still held true a lifetime later. My whole life, she said, in that resonant passage that captured imaginations worldwide in 1947, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service. It was, in the event, a long life, one that both straddled history and made history. Born at the time of the general strike, she acceded to the throne at a time when members of the royal family were still treated with a reverence that seems alien today. By the time she died, she had lived through an era of vast social, material, and technological change, from a period when few people had television sets to the age of the internet. She was a symbol, but what she symbolised changed over the years. At the beginning of her reign, her youth and beauty, set against the austerity and uncertainty of the post-war years, were seized on as an emblem of hope, a harbinger of a new Elizabethan age. If along the way she was regarded by some as a totem of all that was wrong with a class-ridden society, by her later years she came to stand for those old-fashioned virtues that are in such short supply these days: service, duty, modesty, self-sacrifice, and hard work. Yet it is important to remember that beneath the crown there was also a woman, a wife, a mother. She had to cope with the early death of her father, and later the indignity of unsparing public scrutiny, as the marriages of 3 of her children collapsed. Too frequently the human side of her character, her talent for mimicry, her sense of fun, the way she came to life when she was watching her racehorses in action, was overlooked as a nation concentrated instead on the cipher it wanted to see. That oversight may have been partly her own work, as she spent her life presenting a public image suitable for the head of state. However, it was one of the many remarkable aspects of her that, unlike most, she became more relaxed and open to new suggestions as she grew older. Who would have believed that the Queen we once knew would have agreed to take part in a stunt with James Bond for the opening of the London 2012 Olympics? The future Queen Elizabeth II was born in the early hours of April 21st, 1926. She was the daughter of the Duchess of York, the 25-year-old wife of George V's second son, Albert. The birth took place at 17 Bruton Street, Mayfair, the home of her mother's parents, the Earl and Countess of Strathmore. It was a difficult delivery. The official bulletin referred to medical complications and a certain line of treatment, a circumlocution which the newspapers of the day declined to translate. She was delivered, in other words, by caesarean section. Although Elizabeth was not born to be queen, all that time long before anyone had heard of Wallis Simpson, Albert's elder brother David was the heir to the throne and few saw any reason to doubt that the future Edward VIII would do his duty by providing the next generation of the royal family. Her arrival prompted great excitement. Crowds gathered outside the house, and the Daily Sketch, with perhaps less faith in the Prince of Wales than others, announced a possible Queen of England was born yesterday. Among the first visitors to see the new baby, named Elizabeth Alexandra Mary after her mother, great-grandmother and grandmother respectively, were the King and Queen. Such a relief, wrote Queen Mary in her diary, noting that Elizabeth was a little darling with lovely complexion and pretty fair hair. In the ordered upper-class existence of her parents, Elizabeth's world was the nursery, which was ruled over by the formidable Clara Knight, who was known to her young charges as Allah. The distance between child and parent, commonplace in aristocratic families of the time, was exacerbated by her parents' royal duties. When Elizabeth was 9 months old, the Duke and Duchess of York went on a tour of Australia and New Zealand that took them away for 6 months. Her mother wrote in her diary, recalling their parting, "The baby was so sweet, playing with the buttons on Bertie's uniform." To judge by contemporary reports, she was a solemn, self-contained child. Winston Churchill met her when he was invited to Balmoral in the autumn of 1928. "She is a character," the Chancellor wrote to his wife, Clementine. "She had an air of authority and reflectiveness, astonishing in an infant." With her parents so often away, Elizabeth saw much of her grandparents, an arrangement that delighted them. During a 3-month stay at Buckingham Palace, she would be brought down for tea every day with the King and Queen. "Here comes the bambino," the normally stiff Queen would declare. According to some reports, the King used to play with his granddaughter in a way that he never did with his own children. He called her Lilibet, in imitation of her attempts to say her name. Her family called her Lilibet ever after. At Sandringham, the King liked to have her sit next to him at breakfast and would take her round the royal stud to show her his favourite horses. It is more than likely that Elizabeth inherited her lifelong passion for horses from her grandfather, who gave the child her first pony, a Shetland called Peggy, for her 4th birthday. Outside the confines of palace life, she was a celebrity. At the age of 3, she was on the cover of Time magazine, an appearance that was credited with prompting a fashion for children being dressed in yellow instead of pink or blue, after it was revealed that yellow was the predominant colour in both the royal nursery and Elizabeth's wardrobe. By the time she was 4, and had a younger sister in the form of Margaret Rose, born at Glamis Castle, she had her own waxwork at Madame Tussaud's, riding a pony, the second Tussaud's waxwork to be made of her, and a large slice of Antarctica had been named after her. Even her father seemed swept up in the enthusiasm for the much-lauded young princess. Perhaps he hinted one day in the early 1930s to the poet Osbert Sitwell, "She was born for higher things." Comparing her to Queen Victoria, he gave Sitwell a meaningful look and said, "From the first moment of talking she showed so much character that it was impossible not to wonder whether history would not repeat itself." As the girls grew up, the Yorks, by now living at 145 Piccadilly, a large townhouse overlooking Green Park, came to be held in the popular imagination as a model family. They were royal, but sufficiently removed from the ceremonial of court life to represent an ideal to which Middle England could aspire. As Ben Pimlott, the historian, wrote, with the reserved, proud father, practical, child-centred mother, and well-groomed, well-mannered children, they were a distillation of British wholesomeness. For that contented family unit, happy with their place in the order of things, us four, as Bertie called them, everything was to change in 1936. George V died on January the 20th, his end signalled by the famous medical bulletin from his doctor, Lord Dawson of Perrin. The King's life is moving peacefully towards its close. When his body was brought to lie in state in Westminster Hall, the 9-year-old Princess Elizabeth was allowed to stay up late to stand in front of the coffin as her father and 3 uncles stood at each corner. The abdication crisis that followed when Edward VIII decided that he could not continue as king if he could not marry the twice-divorced Mrs. Simpson had such a devastating impact on the royal family that its repercussions are still felt today. It was suffered most immediately by Bertie, who did not want to be king, was rendered thoroughly miserable as the drama unfolded, and implored his elder brother to stay. When the decision was finally made, Bertie, appalled by the burden facing him, broke down in tears on his mother's shoulder. Elizabeth was now next in line to the throne. When our father became king, Princess Margaret recalled, I said to her, "Does that mean you're going to become queen?" She replied, "Yes, I suppose it does." She didn't mention it again. According to her governess, Marion Crawford, Elizabeth was horrified to learn that they were to move to Buckingham Palace. What? You mean forever? Her father's coronation was on May the 12th, 1937, the day that had been reserved for the coronation of Edward VIII. In a diary written in the neat, rounded hand of the 11-year-old Elizabeth, she recorded all that happened that day, from the moment she leapt out of bed at 5 a.m. and crouched at the window with her nursemaid Margaret MacDonald, Bobo, looking at the crowds taking their places in the stands below, to the formal photographs at the end of the day in front of those awful lights. Westminster Abbey, she said, was very, very wonderful. She wrote, the arches and beams at the top were covered with a sort of haze of wonder as Papa was crowned. At least I thought so. Elizabeth and Margaret were the last generation of the British royal family to be educated at home. There were French lessons with Antoinette de Balaigue, dancing with Miss Vacani, drawing sessions and twice weekly riding lessons, and for Elizabeth, history with Sir Henry Martin, Vice Provost of Eton. He was an eccentric figure who secreted lumps of sugar in his pocket that he would munch at intervals. He also kept a raven in his study, which occasionally nipped his ear. He taught the princess not only about the kings and queens of England and Britain, but also the very fundamentals of constitutional history, the building blocks of how one day she would reign as queen. The constitutional textbooks, which are kept under lock and key in the college library at Eton, are marked throughout with Elizabeth's painstaking annotations, a premonition of the punctilious constitutional monarch who would later be such a diligent reader of her government red boxes. Her parents did what they felt they could to allow Elizabeth to mix with other girls of her age, to feel that she was part of the world outside palace walls. The first Buckingham Palace Guide Company was formed with a brownie pack for Margaret, who was too young to be a guide, as a substitute for the princesses going out to school, although as a social leveller it was of limited value. As one member recalled, they were all dukes' daughters and Mountbattens. It wasn't at all democratic. The other girls who turned up for the first meeting in their best party frocks and white gloves, with nannies and governesses in tow, were expected to curtsy to the princesses. While Elizabeth enjoyed the fun and games of the guides, the team games, the expeditions, the campfires, she was in contrast with her sister Margaret, the shy, serious one. Margaret was naughty, high-spirited, amusing, and dreadfully spoilt. Whenever they had company, Margaret would soak up all the attention, a state of affairs that Elizabeth was only too happy to encourage. "Oh, it's so much easier when Margaret's there," she would say. "Everybody laughs at what Margaret says." Her natural reserve, however, did not prevent her from noticing the handsome young cadet who spent the afternoon with them during a visit to the Royal Naval College, Dartmouth, in July 1939. Elizabeth was 13. There was an outbreak of mumps and chicken pox at the college, and it was thought inadvisable for the two princesses to attend chapel with their parents. Cadet Captain Prince Philip of Greece was 18 and was asked by his uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten, Uncle Dickie, who was part of the royal party, to entertain the princesses. Philip, obituary April 9th, 2021, who had led a peripatetic existence since his family had been exiled from Greece, was not a wholly unknown quantity. He was, like Elizabeth, a great-great-grandchild of Queen Victoria, and he had known the British royal family since he was a child, when he took tea at Buckingham Palace with Queen Mary. She reported him as being a nice little boy with very blue eyes. Sketchy accounts and a couple of photographs remain of what happened that afternoon. Philip joined the girls when they were playing with a children's train set. Later they amused themselves by jumping over tennis nets and playing croquet. Crawfey, not necessarily the most reliable of witnesses, recalled, "I thought he showed off a good deal, but the little girls were much impressed. Lilibet said, 'How good is he, Crawfey? How high he can jump.' She never took her eyes off him the whole time. He was quite polite to her, but did not pay her any special attention. He spent a lot of time teasing plump little Margaret." Their Dartmouth encounter may not have been the first time they met. Other accounts have them meeting at a wedding when he was 14 and she was 9. And they may also have come across each other at the coronation of George VI, and the 18-year-old Philip, good-looking but offhand, according to Crawfey, was hardly likely to have been instantly smitten by a 13-year-old schoolgirl. There seems little doubt, however, that for Elizabeth it was a pivotal moment. Sir John Wheeler Bennet, in his official biography of George VI, a work commissioned, scrutinised and approved by the Queen, recorded unequivocally, this was the man with whom Princess Elizabeth had been in love from their first meeting. The seeds of love may have been sown, but serious courtship was still a long way off. The start of war saw to that. While Philip was serving with the Royal Navy, Elizabeth made her own contribution to the war effort in October 1940, when aged 14. she made a radio broadcast as part of a series called Children in Wartime, aimed in the first instance at the US and Canada, and it was addressed to children, but designed to pull their parents' heartstrings. My sister Margaret Rose and I feel so much for you, as we know from experience what it means to be away from those we love most of all, she said in her clear, high voice. The ending was unashamedly corny. My sister is by my side, she said, and we are both going to say good night to you. Come on, Margaret. Good night piped up an even higher voice. Good night and good luck to you all. Jack Colville, Churchill's private secretary, was embarrassed by the sloppy sentiment of it all, but his view hardly mattered. The broadcast was a propaganda triumph, and the BBC turned it into a best-selling record. Philip, meanwhile, was having a good war. He saw action in the Mediterranean and was mentioned in dispatches for his role in the Battle of Cape Matapan against the Italian fleet. He found time to write to Elizabeth, however, and she kept his picture on the mantelpiece. In 1943, he was invited to spend Christmas with the royal family at Windsor Castle, where he watched the annual Windsor family pantomime. After dinner and some charades, Sir Alan Lascelles, the King's private secretary, wrote in his diary for Boxing Day, "They rolled back the carpet in the crimson drawing-room, turned on the gramophone, and frisked and capered away till near 1 a.m. Crawfey observed, "I have never known Lilibet more animated. There was a sparkle about her none of us had ever seen before." As the war drew on and Elizabeth turned 18, she grew increasingly frustrated. Safely sequestered away at Windsor, her social life consisted mainly of enjoying the company of a group of carefully selected young Guards officers, but she was scarcely mixing with a broad range of her contemporaries, all too aware of how her friends were engaged in some kind of war work. She longed to get out and do her bit. Finally, in spring 1945, her father allowed her to join the Auxiliary Territorial Service and take a vehicle maintenance course at Aldershot. It was only a 3-week course, and instead of sleeping with the other young women in their huts, she was whisked back to Windsor every night. However, she enjoyed the chatty cups of tea with the other girls and learned how to service an army truck. And however brief her stint in the ATS, just a few months, it gave her a brief taste of freedom under uniform. That uniform proved its worth on the night of VE Day, May the 8th, when Elizabeth and Margaret slipped out of Buckingham Palace with their young Guards officer friends. They walked to the Ritz and back past Hyde Park Corner before joining the crowds outside the palace, where everyone was shouting, "We want the King! We want the King!" One of the group, Henry Porchester, recalled, "At last they came out on the balcony and we were mixed up in the crowd. No one noticed, no one recognised Princess Elizabeth or Princess Margaret." By then, Philip was already being considered as a serious suitor. In 1944, his uncle, Prince George of Greece, had made a direct approach to George VI, who said that while he liked Philip, he thought Elizabeth was too young. The Queen was not too sure either, and a list of suitable young men was drawn up. Philip persisted, while Elizabeth had already made up her mind. When he proposed to her at Balmoral in the summer of 1946, she immediately set about trying to win her father round. It did not take her long, because the king had already been addressing some of the issues raised by the potential match, such as how Prince Philip of Greece should become a British subject. An accommodation was soon reached. The couple would become engaged, but it had to remain a secret until after the family's royal tour of South Africa the following spring. For a woman who was to become the most travelled monarch in history, the sea voyage to Cape Town was the first time she had set foot outside Britain. Once there, Lascelles thought she did well, businesslike, but with a good, healthy sense of fun. Moreover, he wrote, when necessary she can take on the old bores with much of her mother's skill, and never spares herself in that exhausting part of royal duty. On her 21st birthday, which fell towards the end of the tour, she made the radio broadcast to the Empire and the Commonwealth, to which she made a dedication that not only captured the imagination of all who heard it, but has come to serve as a distillation of the sense of service and duty that would become such a consistent theme of her reign. I declare before you, she said, that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family, to which we all belong. So this photograph is the procession through Westminster Abbey after the Queen's wedding ceremony. The occasion was attended by many heads of state as well as leading British politicians, including Winston Churchill. This is the Queen's coronation. More pictures of the coronation. And here we have a huge number of people turned out to watch the coronation procession across Trafalgar Square. The participants included many divisions of servicemen, mounted police and regimental brass bands. These are pictures of her early reign. And photographs from 1932, 1940, 1947, 1956, 1966, 1976, 1987, 1991, 2010 and 2016. Touring the globe. And this is a picture of the Silver Jubilee in 1977. The later years. This was procession on the River Thames for the Diamond Jubilee in 2012. a picture of our new king, Charles III. So finally we have a photograph. This is the Queen photographed at Balmoral in 2010 as Queen of Scots, sovereign of the most ancient and noble order of the Thistle and chief of the chiefs. Front cover. So the front cover is the Queen in 1953. And this is the pledge that she made on her 21st birthday, April 21st, 1947. I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family, to which we all belong. Hope you enjoyed that little reading. This has been Kate at the Library of Whispers, saying I shall see you very, very soon.